Welcome back, my dear literature-loving friends. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Cinema Vault, and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to experience is not simply a review, but a deeply intellectual exploration of film that is at once myth, legend, and philosophical text. This is an intellectual analysis, not a casual reaction. Today we step into the world of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, a film that has lived in the collective imagination as both sword-swinging spectacle and a strange meditation on fate, power, and survival. When I first saw this film, I was much younger, and to be honest, I was drawn to its surface, the muscles, the battles, the sheer strangeness of its ancient world. But as I grew older and revisited it, I began to notice the silences, the pacing, the way its landscape spoke as loudly as its swords. I began to hear echoes of mythology and philosophy in its dialogue and imagery, and suddenly it wasn't just pulp fantasy to me anymore. It was something that belonged to the same tradition as epic poetry, as Gilgamesh, as Homer's tales, as the myths whispered by firelight. The film is camp, yes, but it is also a mirror of how human beings have always told stories about strength, survival, and the cruelty of gods and men. The introduction of the story is deceptively simple. A boy witnesses the destruction of his village, the death of his parents, and the cruelty of raiders who treat lives as dust beneath their boots. But this primal scene, this origin of grief, is what carves him into the figure we know, a man whose body is forged by chains and hardship, whose soul is sharpened not by philosophy but by pain. When we see him grown, we are not only watching a man with a sword, but a symbol of humanity itself, shaped by brutality into something both terrifying and strangely noble. The overview of the film's arc follows the rhythm of ancient myths. A child torn from innocence, raised in captivity, trained as a fighter, made into a weapon for others' amusement, and finally loosed into a world that demands he define himself. Along the way he finds allies, lovers, and enemies, each one embodying some part of what it means to live in a world without mercy. It is both a hero's journey and an anti-hero's. Conan does not fight for ideals but for survival, not for justice but for vengeance. And yet in doing so, he embodies the oldest truths of epic storytelling, that strength can be both curse and salvation, that destiny waits in shadows, and that freedom is paid for in blood. What fascinated me even as I rewatched the film recently is how it lingers in silence. Long passages pass without dialogue, only the sound of wind across desolate plains, the clang of chains, the breathing of men in combat. These silences are where the film reveals its soul. They remind us that this is not a world of clever quips or fast-talking heroes, but of weight, of elemental forces, of lives measured in scars. It is a reminder that cinema, like myth, sometimes speaks loudest in its quietest moments. The plot can be sketched as a journey from enslavement to vengeance to destiny. Early on, Conan is powerless, tossed by forces larger than himself. Slowly he gathers agency, first through the strength of his own body, then through companions who fight beside him, then through the pursuit of the cult leader who shattered his life. Along the way, we glimpse a world where civilizations rise and fall like tides, where magic hovers at the edges of human ambition, where death is never far. What begins as one man's story becomes a reflection of a whole culture's hunger for myth. Yet the film saves its most unsettling revelations for later. The cult leader, charismatic and terrifying, is not simply an enemy to be slain, but a figure of philosophy, a man who commands not only armies but belief. When Conan finally confronts him, the battle is not only physical but ideological. The strength of flesh against the strength of faith, the sword against the word. This confrontation teases us with a twist, not of plot mechanics, but of meaning. For who is truly stronger, the man who can crush with his arms, or the man who can command thousands with his voice? The film refuses to give a simple answer. It lets the image of a severed head speak for itself, and we are left to wrestle with what victory really means. In teasing its twists, the movie also tempts us with romance, loyalty, betrayal, and resurrection. Companions fall, lovers are lost, and the question of fate hangs heavy. Is Conan free, or is he only walking the path laid by gods? The film sprinkles hints of this, never over-explaining, letting us feel the weight of inevitability. And that is what makes it more than fantasy. It is myth. It is tragedy. It is philosophy disguised as spectacle. By the end of this introduction, what I want you to feel is not just curiosity about the plot, but recognition of the deeper storm swirling inside it. The story of a boy who loses everything and becomes legend is also our story, the story of humanity itself, fragile, violent, enduring. The storm has not yet broken in our analysis, but we can already feel the ground trembling. Ahead lies a journey into its detailed halves, its characters, its facts, its themes, its symbols, its echoes behind the screen. But for now, let us linger in the silence before the clash, the breath before the battle. For that is where myth lives, not in the strike, but in the waiting. The opening minutes of the film set the tone like the first notes of an epic poem. Snow drifts across a desolate landscape. A blacksmith forges a sword, and the voice of Mako speaks of gods, giants, and the rise of steel. It is not just prologue. It is invocation, the kind of invocation that Homer would have used, a summoning of the muses. Except here the muse is fire and hammer and destiny itself. We meet Conan as a child in a world that feels both mythic and harshly real. A world where strength is the only law, and where cruelty wears the face of raiders who descend without warning. His father speaks of steel, of the secret of its strength, and in this lesson is planted the seed of the entire film. The lesson will outlive the father, will echo long after blood stains the snow. The raid comes suddenly. Horses thunder through the snowbound village. Swords glint. Fire rises. Conan's mother holds him close, sword in hand, her eyes burning with defiance even as the raiders cut through everything she knows. His father is struck down. Wolves tear him apart while the boy watches. The boy is dragged into the center of the village, where he sees a man who leads the raiders, a figure who will haunt him, Thulsa Doom. The man's presence is chilling not only because of his power, but because of the calm that surrounds him. He does not rage, he does not snarl. He simply is, and in his gaze we see the first hints of philosophy that will later clash with Conan's steel. Doom raises his hand. Conan's mother stands ready, and then her head falls to the ground, severed. The boy is left staring at emptiness, his childhood cut down in an instant. From here, Conan's life is one long chain. Literally. He is shackled to the wheel of pain, a massive millstone he and other children push in endless circles. The wheel becomes his school, his shaping tool, grinding years into his body until the boy becomes a man, his shoulders broad, his frame massive, his eyes hollow but burning with endurance. Others chained to the wheel fall, vanish. But Conan survives, the wheel sculpting him into something almost inhuman. The silence of these years speaks louder than words. No dialogue explains, but the image of his endless circling tells us everything. When he is finally unchained, it is not for freedom, but for spectacle. He is thrown into the pit as a gladiator, forced to fight for the amusement of strangers. At first he stumbles, his survival more luck than skill, but he learns quickly, each fight etching lessons into his body. He learns how to strike, how to endure pain, how to see an opponent's weakness and exploit it. He becomes not just survivor, but champion. His reputation spreading, his body scarred but unbroken. He is trained by masters, taught weapons, languages, philosophies even, though the film suggests he absorbs these less as ideas and more as tools. The boy who once stared at death now delivers it with terrifying efficiency. Eventually, Conan is freed, not by mercy but by whim. His owner sees in him something beyond entertainment and sets him loose into the world. This is the moment when the story begins to breathe differently, when the camera leaves cages and pits and follows Conan into the vastness of the world. He stumbles at first, like a child reborn, marveling at freedom, at the sheer expanse of land and sky. It is in this stage that he finds companions, each one drawn to him by chance but bound to him by loyalty. The first is Subutai, the archer and thief, wiry where Conan is massive, quick where Conan is deliberate. Their friendship begins with suspicion, but soon solidifies, each recognizing the other a fellow survivor. Later comes Valeria, fierce and wild, a woman whose love is forged in battle as much as in tenderness. Together, they form a small band, their adventures driven at first by plunder, by survival, by the thrill of freedom. Yet beneath it all is Conan's unspoken hunger for vengeance, the memory of his village burning, of Thulsa Doom's calm gaze as his mother's head fell. Their adventures bring them into contact with kingdoms, with corrupt officials, with whisper rumors of Doom's growing cult. The cult is strange, more than just raiders. It is a religion, a movement, men and women abandoning lives to follow Doom, to worship the power he embodies. The trio is eventually hired to rescue a princess who has fallen under Doom's influence, and this mission shifts the story from wandering adventure to direct confrontation. The cult becomes not just a rumor, but a presence, a snake coiled across the land. Infiltrating Doom's temple reveals the scale of his power. The cult is not a ragged band of believers, but an organized force. Its rituals both terrifying and hypnotic. There are chants, sacrifices, flames rising as serpents coil. Doom himself sits at the center like a priest-king, his presence radiating authority. Conan sees him again after all these years, and the film lingers on his gaze, the boy within a man staring at the one who destroyed his world. But vengeance is not immediate. The cult is too strong, and Conan is not yet ready. The first half of the film crescendos with betrayal and suffering. Attempting to strike too soon, Conan is captured. He is beaten, mocked, tied to a tree of woe where vultures descend to tear at him. His body is broken, his vengeance denied. Yet even here, fate does not abandon him. His companions rescue him, Valeria pleading with spirits to save him. The wind rising, magic circling around his body as shamans chant. He lies on the edge of death, and for a moment, it seems the boy who lost everything will lose everything again. But he endures, as he always has. And when he rises, it is with a new depth of purpose. The first half closes with Conan scarred, humbled, but alive. He has faced his enemy and failed, but the failure has not destroyed him. It has deepened him. The path to vengeance is no longer a straight line of steel, but a twisting road of loss, loyalty, and fate. The boy who once pushed the wheel of pain now pushes against destiny itself, and we are left with the sense that the storm is only beginning. The tree of woe does not kill him, John, it reshapes him. When Conan rises again, healed by magic and loyalty, the second half of his journey begins. The world around him is no longer an endless expanse of chance and wandering. It is now a road that curves inevitably toward Thulsa Doom. He has looked into the eyes of his enemy and seen both power and philosophy, and though he carries scars, he also carries clarity. Vengeance is no longer a vague hunger, but a path written in blood and fire. The band of companions tightens, their bonds sealed not only by shared battles, but by the brush with death. Valeria becomes more than ally. She becomes anchor, her laughter bright against the darkness, her love a reminder that life is not only vengeance. Subutai, loyal and sharp, watches Conan with the wary devotion of one who has seen greatness tempered by failure. Together they stand as a fragile family, one built not on heritage but on choice, forged in the furnace of survival. The mission to save the princess grows urgent, for Doom's cult spreads like infection, its serpentine banners rising across the land. Villages crumble, kings despair, families vanish into the thrall of the snake god. The trio disguises themselves, infiltrating the heart of the cult's temple once again. What they find is stranger than they had imagined. Rituals drenched in firelight, worshippers surrendering identity to the collective. A sea of eyes fixed on Doom as though he were more than man. His words carry weight that no blade can match, his voice bending thousands as easily as steel bends a forge. The rescue is daring, chaotic, bloody. They seize the princess, but their triumph is paid in death. Valeria falls in battle, her life extinguished in the very moment when love had given Conan a glimpse of peace. Her death is not quick, nor is it meaningless. It is a wound that deepens his resolve, transforming vengeance from hunger to necessity. The way the film lingers on her passing, the way her absence echoes in every moment after, gives her death the weight of myth, the inevitability of sacrifice. She becomes not only lover but legend, her spirit haunting Conan as he walks into the final confrontation. The journey to Doom's fortress feels like walking into fate itself. The mountain rises like a serpent coiled against the sky, its stone temples carved with symbols of power and worship. Conan approaches not as reckless warrior, but as man marked by loss, his eyes carrying both rage and grief. The final battle is staged not as a single duel, but as a clash of worlds. Steel against faith, flesh against belief. His enemies are not only Doom's warriors, but the cultists themselves, their loyalty more terrifying than any blade. Yet one by one, Conan carves through them, each strike echoing the lesson of steel his father once spoke of. When at last he stands before Doom, the tension is not just physical but philosophical. Doom speaks not as villain but as prophet, his words suggesting that strength is not in the sword but in the will, not in steel but in faith. He calls Conan his child, not in blood but in philosophy, claiming that it was his raid, his cruelty, his philosophy that forged Conan into what he has become. For a moment, we almost believe him. For a moment, Conan himself hesitates. But then steel speaks louder than words. With one decisive stroke, Conan severs the head of the man who destroyed his childhood, and the philosophy of faith collapses beneath the weight of vengeance. The cult shatters. Doom's followers, once entranced, fall silent as their leader's head rolls down the temple steps. The spell is broken, their faith undone, and they scatter into the night. The flames of the temple rise, consuming stone and serpent alike, leaving only ruin in their wake. Conan stands alone in the light of fire, a figure both triumphant and desolate. He has achieved vengeance, but he has lost love. He has destroyed his enemy, but the silence that follows feels heavy, almost unbearable. The final images of the film refuse to give us easy resolution. We see Conan older, seated on a throne, his body larger, his beard grown, his eyes distant. The voiceover speaks of how he will one day become king by his own hand, and in that promise we glimpse the continuation of myth, the endless cycle of destiny. Yet the film closes not with certainty, but with ambiguity. Will he find peace, or will the storms of vengeance always circle him? Is he hero or is he tragedy? The story leaves us with silence as heavy as its beginning, a silence that feels like myth being written even as it fades. The second half of Conan's journey, then, is not merely resolution of plot, but the transformation of myth. It takes the boy who lost everything and makes him legend, but it does not comfort us. It leaves us with questions, with unease, with the recognition that strength alone is never enough, that survival always costs, that destiny always demands sacrifice. And perhaps that is why the film endures, why it lingers not only as spectacle but as story. Because it dares end not in triumph but in silence, in the heavy truth that even victory cannot silence grief. The characters of this story live in memory like carved figures of myth John, each one larger than life, yet marked by the cracks and shadows that make them human. They are not simply players in a fantasy adventure. They are archetypes, fragments of ancient storytelling, walking embodiments of ideas, as much as of flesh and blood. To speak of them is to recognize how the film builds its power not only through battles and spectacle, but through the presence of people who embody strength, loyalty, faith, love, and betrayal. At the center stands Conan himself, the boy who became legend. His journey is not one of learning wisdom or discovering hidden truths. It is a journey of endurance. He survives where others fall. He endures where others collapse. He hardens where others break. The wheel that turned for years carved his body into stone, but it also carved silence into his soul. He is not talkative. He is not philosophical. His language is action, his voice is steel, and his silence is heavier than dialogue. Yet within this silence there is depth, for Conan carries grief like a scar that never heals. His eyes burn with the memory of his parents' death, of Doom's calm cruelty, of a world that taught him early that gods do not protect and men do not forgive. He is more than warrior. He is witness, a man whose every act of violence is born of remembrance. And yet there is tenderness within him too, glimpsed in his love for Valeria, in his loyalty to Subotai, in the way he kneels before his father's old lessons about steel. He is both brutal and noble, tragic and heroic, a paradox shaped by pain. Valeria burns brightly, a figure of fierce independence and love that arrives like a flame in Conan's otherwise cold world. She is not a passive companion, but a partner, a thief and warrior who lives by her own code. Her presence is intoxicating. Her laughter, her boldness, her refusal to submit to fate. In her, Conan finds not only love but equality, a reflection of his own strength in feminine form. Her death is therefore not only tragic but transformative. When she falls, she becomes symbol, her spirit haunting Conan, reminding him that strength without love is emptiness. Valeria is one of the film's most striking characters because she refuses to be reduced to a supporting role. She is her own legend, her own myth, and even in death, she remains a force that drives the story forward. Subotai, the archer and thief, is the film's heart of loyalty. Quick, wiry, often humorous, he balances Conan's silence with wit and energy. He is not bound by destiny in the same way. He could have lived 1,000 other lives. Yet he chooses to follow Conan, to stand beside him in impossible battles, to risk death again and again. In his companionship, we see the importance of friendship in a world defined by violence. Without Subotai, Conan would be only a lone figure of vengeance. With him, Conan becomes part of a fragile family. Subotai symbolizes the bonds of choice, the loyalty born not of blood or obligation but of recognition. One survivor seeing another and choosing to walk beside them. Thulsa Doom is more than antagonist. He is a philosophical shadow cast across the story. Played with eerie calm, he represents a danger charisma, the strength not of arms but of belief. His power lies not only in his sword but in his voice, his ability to gather thousands under his banner, to make people surrender themselves willingly. He is chilling not because he rages, but because he doesn't need to. His calm gaze, his soft-spoken words, his quiet confidence all carry weight heavier than steel. When he tells Conan that he created him, that it was his raid that forged Conan into legend, we almost believe him. Doom symbolizes the seduction of ideology, the allure of surrendering individuality to the collective, the danger of mistaking faith for truth. He is villain, yes, but he is also mirror, forcing us to ask whether Conan is truly free or whether he is only the product of Doom's philosophy. King Osric, though a smaller character, represents a corruption and weariness of power. He hires Conan and his companions to rescue his daughter, but he does so not out of nobility but desperation. His kingdom crumbles, his power wanes, and in his words we hear the exhaustion of rulers who cannot control the forces that rise around them. He symbolizes the fragility of kingdoms, the inevitability of decline, the truth that even crowns cannot withstand storms of faith and steel. The princess, lost to Doom's cult, is both victim and symbol. She represents innocence consumed by ideology, youth seduced by promises of belonging. Her rescue is necessary, but her role is not to act. It is to embody what is at stake when faith becomes fanaticism. In her we see the cost of Doom's philosophy, the way it devours the vulnerable, the way it transforms longing for meaning into chains of worship. Even the minor characters, the shamans, the cultists, the gladiators, all contribute to the film's mythic texture. Each one embodies a fragment of the world. Cruelty, loyalty, superstition, hunger. They are not individuals so much as archetypes, pieces of a larger mosaic that makes the Hyborian world feel alive and brutal. Together, these characters form a tapestry of myth. Conan the silent avenger, Valeria the flame of love and equality, Subotai the loyal companion, Doom the charismatic tyrant, Osric the weary king, the princess the lost innocent. They are not merely roles but symbols. Each one reflects an idea: strength, love, loyalty, belief, corruption, innocence. And as their stories intertwine, they create not only drama but philosophy. What makes the character analysis of this film so rich is that each figure carries weight beyond the screen. We recognize them not only as fantasy creations, but as echoes of real archetypes that have walked through human history and myth. They are Gilgamesh and Enkidu, Helen and Achilles, tyrants and kings, lovers and martyrs. In watching them, we are reminded that stories of strength and survival are as old as humanity itself, and that each character, no matter how fantastical, is really a reflection of us. The strangest fact about Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John, are the kind that slip through cracks in memory and whisper from behind the screen. They're the anecdotes that make the film more than just a story. It becomes a myth of its own production with accidents, obsessions, controversies, and bizarre little details that feel almost as legendary as the adventures of Conan himself. The first strange fact is that the film itself nearly didn't exist. The project had been gestating for years, bouncing between studios, its rights passed like treasure from hand to hand. At one point it was considered too violent, at another too expensive, at another too pulpy for audiences to take seriously. It was the persistence of producer Dino de Laurentiis that finally brought it to life. His conviction at the time was right for a film that could merge pulp fantasy with operatic spectacle. Yet even as Cameron prepared to roll, there were doubts about whether it could ever find an audience. Casting Conan was itself a strange saga. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not yet the global icon he would become. He was a bodybuilder with a few roles but no proven star power. At first, some laughed at the idea of him carrying a film. His accent was considered a liability, his acting untested, his presence too unconventional. But director John Milius insisted, believing that Arnold's physicality was not merely decoration, but the very essence of Conan. He looks like someone carved from stone, Milius argued, and Conan must look as though the gods themselves shaped him. This gamble became legend, turning a man once dismissed for his strangeness into a star who would define an era. Filming itself was fraught with oddities. The production chose Spain for its sweeping landscapes, its plains and deserts standing in for the Hyborian Age. Yet the land was not empty. Ruins of ancient civilizations dotted the horizon, lending eerie authenticity to a film that was itself a patchwork of myth. Locals were recruited as extras, their faces lining the cult crowds, their voices chanting in strange unison. Some remember the sets more vividly than the film. Speaking of nights where fires blazed, drums beat, and villagers pretended to worship snakes under the hot Spanish sun. For a moment, cinema blurred into ritual. Practical effects provided their own strangeness. Real snakes were used in many scenes, massive pythons that slithered through temples and coiled around actors. Handlers kept them under control, but there were moments when the snakes resisted, twisting violently or refusing to move. Arnold himself had to wrestle with one of these creatures on set, and though the scene was choreographed, the danger was real. He later recalled that the snake nearly suffocated him before handlers intervened. What audiences saw as fantasy was, in some cases, frighteningly real. The weapons, too, carried weight. The sword were crafted by real blacksmiths, heavy and sharp enough to wound. Actors often left set with bruises and cuts, their skin marked by the realism of their props. Milius, obsessed with authenticity, demanded that actors train not only in choreography, but in the philosophy of combat, treating each fight as ritual rather than stunt. This obsession created fights that felt primal, unscripted, and strange in their intensity. One of the strangest facts is how the film faced censorship. Its violence, its nudity, its pagan imagery. These sparked controversy across countries. Scenes of sacrifice, of bodies torn by beasts, of heads severed by blades, were trimmed in some markets, censored in others. Yet these very controversies fueled the film's reputation, turning it into a forbidden myth for some audiences. Teenagers sought it out not only for its spectacle, but for the sense that they were seeing something dangerous, something that crossed lines polite cinema avoided. Another curious detail lies in the score. Basil Polidori's composed music that has since become iconic, a sweeping orchestral work that elevated the film beyond pulp into operatic grandeur. Yet he did so under conditions that were often rushed and chaotic, writing themes that had to anchor sequences still unfinished. His music is strange in its power, almost too grand for the film it supports, and it transformed the narrative into something larger than itself. Without it, Conan might have remained pulp. With it, it became legend. The production was dangerous. Actors performed many of their own stunts, often without modern safety standards. Horses charged through fire, swords clashed in earnest, extras hurled themselves into chaos. Arnold was injured several times, as were his co-stars, and stories circulated of nights spent tending bruises with little more than alcohol and determination. The set felt at times like a battlefield, its crew surviving each day as though they were warriors themselves. One of the oddest stories involves a wheel of pain. This massive structure, designed as the instrument of Conan's youth, became a symbol in its own right. It was built to function, to turn underweight, and Arnold spent days pushing it in the hot sun. Locals later remembered it as a monument left behind, a strange piece of cinema embedded in the land. For some, it became almost mythic, a wheel that marked the passage of seasons long after filming ended. The cult scenes carried their own surreal quality. Hundreds of extras, cloaked and chanting, gathered around fires at night, their voices echoing across valleys. Crew members spoke of feeling uneasy, as though they were witnessing an actual ritual. The line between performance and ceremony blurred, and some later joked, half seriously, that they had accidentally called upon old gods. Stranger still is how the film's legacy evolved. Upon release, Critics were divided. Some dismissed it as violent nonsense, too brutal, too shallow. Others saw in the echo of myth the operatic weight of epic storytelling. Over time, it has grown in reputation, its strangeness transforming into timelessness. What was once mocked is now revered, not only as a fantasy adventure, but as a cultural artifact. And then there are the small details, the trivia that fans cherish. Arnold had to learn to handle swords so heavy that he trained daily just to lift them with grace. Sandstorms on set forced scenes to be reshot, lending the film a texture of real chaos. Animals sometimes refused to perform, leaving handlers scrambling. Extras, poorly paid, often brought their own costumes, adding to the strange authenticity of the crowds. The strangest fact of all, perhaps, is how a film once considered unlikely, violent, and unmarketable has become immortal. It birthed a star, defined a genre, and etched itself into cultural memory. People still quote its lines, still hear Polidori's score in their heads, still imagine the wheel of pain turning endlessly. It is not just a movie, but a myth of cinema itself. Strange in its making, strange in its reception, and strangely eternal. Critical perspectives in the movie events around Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John, are like storms of interpretation swirling around a piece of cinema that refuses to sit quietly in one genre or tradition. The film's release was not just an entertainment event. It was a cultural moment that revealed as much about the anxieties and appetites of its time as it did about swords and sorcery. When we look back through the eyes of critics, audiences, and scholars, the film's strange resonance becomes clearer. It was never only about Conan. It was about the early 1980s, about what myth means in a modern world, about the politics of violence and the hunger for legend. At the time of its release, critical voices were divided sharply. Some saw only pulp, a violent fantasy with little to offer beyond muscles and swords. They dismissed Arnold's performance as wooden, his accent as comical, the plot as shallow. For them, the film was exploitation dressed in mythic clothing, too crude to deserve serious attention. Yet even these negative reviews carried fascination, for they could not ignore the film's raw presence, the sense that something ancient and strange had been smuggled into modern cinema. It was brutal, yes, but it lingered. Other critics, however, saw something deeper. They noted the silences, the weight of the landscapes, the operatic music, the way the story echoed Joseph Campbell's theories of the hero's journey. To them, Conan was not just sword and sandal spectacle, but a modern epic, a return to storytelling as myth. The violence was not gratuitous, but ritualistic, echoing the brutality of Homeric tales. The film's critics argued among themselves not about whether it was violent, but about what that violence meant. Was it barbaric indulgence, or was it honest reflection of humanity's ancient past? The movie events surrounding its release also shaped perception. It came at a time when audiences were hungry for fantasy, but had not yet been saturated by it. Star Wars had awakened appetite for myth in modern clothing, and Conan arrived as its darker, more primal cousin. There were no space battles here, no cheerful droids, no reassurance of happy endings. Instead, audiences were given raw flesh, chains, steel, blood. For some, it was shocking, almost offensive. For others, it was cathartic, a plunge into something elemental that cinema rarely dared touch. Scholars later looked back and saw in Conan a reflection of politics as well as myth. The early 1980s in America were marked by the rise of Reagan, by rhetoric of strength, endurance, triumph over weakness. Arnold himself would later embody this ethos in his public persona, and the film could be read as both product and prophecy of that cultural moment. Conan's silence, his endurance, his reliance on muscle over words, all mirrored a political climate that valued strength above nuance. Critics debated whether the film was reactionary, celebrating brute force, or whether it was tragic, showing the cost of such force. Film festivals and retrospectives have since treated Conan with seriousness it lacked on release. It has been shown not only as fantasy, but as mythopoetic cinema, a work that blurs the line between B-movie pulp and operatic epic. The music by Basil Polidori's is often singled out as transformative, elevating the film into something resembling Wagnerian opera. Critics in later decades argued that if one listened carefully, the score itself revealed the film's intentions. Not camp, not parody, but tragedy. The music does not laugh at the violence. It mourns it celebrates it, mythologizes it. The movie's events in the cultural imagination also include controversy. Parents' groups complained of its nudity, its gore, its pagan rituals. Religious critics accused it of glamorizing cults and sorcery. Censors in various countries cut scenes, trimming sacrifices and beheadings, try and tame the film's wildness. Yet censorship only added to its reputation, making it forbidden fruit for young audiences who whispered about its excesses. The very events that sought to limit its impact only deepened its myth. Over time, critics began to connect Conan to older cinematic traditions. They compared it to silent films, noting how much of the story was told without words, through bodies, landscapes, music. They drew parallels to Kurosawa, to Eisenstein, to Leone, directors who used myth, silence, and ritual violence to craft cinematic poetry. Seen this way, Conan was less exploitation and more experiment, a film that dared to slow its pace, to let silence speak, to trust imagery to carry meaning. Audience reactions at the time were perhaps the most honest critical perspective. Some laughed at its oddness, some thrilled at its brutality, some walked out disturbed, some returned again and again, drawn by something they could not name. In their responses, we see the truth. The film provoked. It did not leave viewers indifferent. It was not background entertainment. It demanded reaction, whether disdain or awe. Today, the critical perspective has softened into appreciation. Scholars analyze its themes of fate, survival, and the philosophy of steel. Audiences revisit it with nostalgia, but also with fresh eyes, seeing in its silences and brutalities something absent from slick modern blockbusters. Its reputation has grown into cult classic, then into acknowledged landmark. What was once dismissed as crude has become recognized as mythic. The strangest critical perspective of all is that what once seemed barbaric now seems sophisticated. In a world where fantasy films often drown in dialogue, quips, and CGI excess, Conan feels austere, disciplined, pure. Its brutality no longer shocks as it once did. Instead, it reads as honesty, a refusal to soften the edges of myth. Critics now ask whether we have lost something by dismissing such films, whether in our hunger for polish we have forgotten the raw poetry of silence and steel. Thus the movie events and perspectives surrounding Conan the Barbarian form their own epic. Dismissal, controversy, censorship, rediscovery, reverence. The film's journey mirrors Conan's own, from scorned outsider to enduring legend. It has been beaten, mocked, cast aside, but it endures, stronger for the struggle. And like Conan himself, it sits now on a kind of mythic throne, scarred but unbowed, a reminder that even pulp can become poetry if it survives long enough. The production of Conan the Barbarian in 1982, John, is its own myth, one that lives in anecdotes whispered by cast and crew, in bruises earned on set, in strange coincidences that feel as fated as anything in the story itself. To speak of it is to step behind a curtain of spectacle and discover a tale of obsession, improvisation, and danger, a story where the making of the film almost matched the brutality and strangeness of what ended up on screen. It begins with a vision of director John Milius, a man who did not want to make a light fantasy, but a saga. He approached the film less as pulp and more as scripture, determined to infuse every frame with weight. His obsession with authenticity shaped the production in strange ways. He demanded real swords, heavy and dangerous, because he believed that only steel could give actors the right presence. He wanted landscapes that looked ancient, not sound stages that felt false. He pushed his cast and crew to endure hardship, believing that struggle itself would shape performances. His methods were controversial, even reckless, but they gave the film its raw, mythic quality. Arnold Schwarzenegger's presence on set was itself a fun fact of legend. Cast when he was still more bodybuilder than actor, Arnold trained relentlessly with weapons, spending months learning swordplay until blade became extension of his arm. He carried the weight of weapons that many thought too heavy for real use, yet he swung them with grace born of discipline. His accent, mocked by some, was embraced by Milius, who felt that Conan should sound foreign, otherworldly. On set, Arnold bore injuries from stunts, bruises from blades, scrapes from falls, but he refused to use doubles whenever possible. He wanted to embody Conan, not only in muscle but in endurance. Spain became the canvas of the film's Hyborian world, its deserts, plains, and ruins providing authenticity that no Hollywood lot could replicate. Shooting there created logistical challenges. Weather unpredictable, terrain harsh, infrastructure limited. Yet these hardships added texture. Extras drawn from local villages stood as cultists, their chanting echoing off real mountains. Ancient ruins became temples. Snakes slithered across stones that had been weathered for centuries. The land itself became a character, lending the film weight it could never have achieved otherwise. One of the strangest and most dangerous elements was the use of real animals. The production employed massive snakes for the cult scenes, and while handlers controlled them, their behavior was never fully predictable. Arnold himself wrestled a python on camera, a scene that was far more real than most viewers suspected. The snake coiled tightly around him, resisting, and for a moment the struggle risked turning deadly. Handlers intervened, but the danger was genuine. That authenticity bleeds into the scene. What we watch is not only acting but survival. The Wheel of Pain, built as a functioning machine, became its own icon. Arnold spent days pushing it under the sun, and though it was symbolic in the film, it was also physically exhausting in reality. Locals remembered the wheel long after production ended, a strange monument left behind by cinema. Crew members joked that Arnold's legendary endurance came not only from bodybuilding, but from pushing that wheel endlessly. The cult ritual staged for the camera carried eerie resonance. Hundreds of extras gathered, cloaked and chanting, around fires that blazed into the night. Crew members described the atmosphere as unsettling, as though they were witnessing real ceremony. The line between acting and ritual blurred, and some whispered that they had conjured something unintended. These nights became memories that extras carried for years, recalling how strange it felt to shout praises to serpents under the Spanish sky. The music, composed by Basil Polidori's, was its own miracle, working under pressure. He created a score that transcended the film, music that has since become iconic. He wrote themes that were operatic, almost Wagnerian, elevating the brutality of the film into something mythic. Fun fact abound about how his score was recorded. Massive choirs chanting in languages invented for effect. Drums beating so loudly that walls shook. Orchestras playing as though performing not for cinema, but for gods. The result gave Conan a grandeur far beyond its budget. Music that critics later recognized as one of the greatest film scores ever composed. The stunts carried real risk. Horses charged through flames. Actors clashed with heavy blades. Extras hurled themselves into chaos without modern safety measures. Injuries were common. Arnold himself suffered cuts and bruises. His co-stars endured similar wounds. And nights ended with crew patching themselves together with whiskey and grit. Yet these risks gave the film its texture. When we see fear in the actor's eyes, it is often real. When bodies stumble, it is not always choreography. It is exhaustion. Controversy shadowed the production. Animal rights groups criticized the use of live creatures. Censors worried about the film's violence and sexuality. Politicians questioned whether such brutality should be celebrated. Yet these very controversies added to its reputation. The film became dangerous, forbidden, whispered about. Audiences sought it out not only for fantasy, but for transgression. There are lighter fun facts, too. The rubber cow used in homage to pulp absurdity became beloved by crew, dressed in hats between takes. Extras often improvise, their costumes sometimes assembled from their own wardrobes, lending authenticity by accident. Arnold's training sword was so heavy that he carried it everywhere, even offset, until crew joked that he was married to it. Milius, ever eccentric, sometimes fired real guns on set to get attention, a detail both alarming and strangely consistent with his obsession for primal energy. In the end, the production of Conan the Barbarian was itself a saga. It was dangerous, chaotic, sometimes reckless, often strange. Yet from its bruises and accidents came authenticity. The film feels heavy because it was heavy, feels brutal because it was brutal, feels mythic because those who made it treated it as ritual. Behind the spectacle we see on screen is another story, one of filmmakers and actors enduring storms of their own, pushing wheels of pain, chanting in fires, bleeding for myth. And perhaps that is why the film endures, because its production was not smooth but scarred, not safe but dangerous, not ordinary but strange. It was itself a barbarian thing, rough, unruly, forged in sweat and fire. The strangest fun fact of all is that the making of Conan mirrors the film's themes: survival through endurance, triumph through pain, myth carved from suffering. The wheel turned for cast and crew as much as for Conan himself, and from that turning came legend. The setting and cinematic elements of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John, are what give the film its mythic weight. They do more than provide a backdrop. They create a world that feels ancient, harsh, and alive, a place where myth can breathe, and where every stone and shadow contributes to the atmosphere of destiny. When we enter its world, we do not feel as though we are watching a stage play or a glossy fantasy. We feel as though we have stumbled into an older age, one that remembers gods and monsters, one where steel is not a metaphor but survival itself. Spain became the canvas for this world, its plains, deserts, and ruins transforming into the Hyborian age. The filmmakers deliberately chose landscapes that felt raw, untamed, and vast. Mountains rise like teeth, deserts stretch endlessly, rivers cut through barren fields. These places carry history within them. Ruins of castles, remnants of forgotten civilizations, stones weathered by centuries. Shooting in these real environments gave the film a grounded quality. We can see the dust rising under hooves, the sweat on actors' brows, the grit clinging to skin. It feels lived in, not constructed, and this authenticity makes the story's brutality more believable. The Wheel of Pain, massive and bleak, is one of the most iconic settings, and its design reflects a philosophy of the film. It is not just a prop but a symbol, placed in an empty field with nothing but sky and dirt around it. The starkness of the location emphasizes Conan's isolation, his endless circling in a world that offers no mercy. When we see him pushing that wheel through years, the barren land around him becomes part of his prison, a setting that reflects the emptiness of his early life. Cinematography captures these settings with patience. The camera lingers on wide landscapes, giving us time to feel their vastness. It does not rush, it observes. Long takes of Conan walking alone through plains remind us of his smallness against the world. When battles erupt, the camera does not indulge in fast cuts, but in steady observation, letting us feel the weight of each blow. This patience gives the film a strange rhythm, slow, heavy operatic, that feels closer to ancient epic than to modern action. Color plays its role as well. The palette is earthy, browns, grays, the muted tones of dust and stone. Fire provides contrast, flaring in reds and oranges against a muted world. The cult scenes are drenched in shadow and flame, their settings of caves and temples glowing with unnatural light. These choices create mood without words, showing us that this is not a bright or hopeful world, but one that swallows light, one where survival is not guaranteed. Lighting deepens a mythic tone. Sunsets stretch across skies in crimson, silhouettes of warriors etched against them like figures in legend. Fires illuminate rituals, casting flickering shadows that make cultists look inhuman. Moonlight falls cold on ruins, giving battles a ghostly quality. Even the interiors are lit with torches and flames, the absence of modern light reminding us constantly that this is a primitive, elemental world. Architecture also shapes the film's atmosphere. The cult temples, with their stone steps and serpent motifs, feel timeless, as though carved by hands that believe in gods of chaos. Their scale dwarfs the characters, reminding us that human lives are small against the backdrop of belief and history. Even the smaller sets, like taverns and villages, are constructed with detail that emphasizes fragility, with that looks ready to burn, walls that cannot withstand a storm. The world is not built for safety. It is built for survival, and the settings make us feel that precariousness. Sound is part of the cinematic element, too. Beyond Basil Polidori's majestic score, the film uses silence and natural sound to immerse us. The wind whistles across plains, fire crackles at night, swords ring against shields. These sounds are not polished but raw, reminding us constantly of the material reality of this world. When the music rises, it feels like commentary on myth. When it falls silent, the setting itself speaks. The costuming integrates into the setting seamlessly. Conan's furs, Doom's serpent robes, Valeria's armor, all look functional, not decorative. They feel like clothing meant to endure weather, battle, and ritual. The textures, rough leather, chainmail worn fabric, mirror the textures of the landscapes. Together, costumes and settings create a visual unity, a world where nothing feels modern, nothing feels soft. Perhaps the most striking element of the film's cinematic design is its reliance on silence. Unlike many fantasies filled with chatter, Conan allows setting and imagery to carry the story. We learn about the world not through exposition, but through what we see. Villages burned, wheels turned, ruins looming. The absence of constant dialogue forces us to observe, to absorb the world visually. It is a cinematic choice that makes the setting not just background but narrative. The final image of Conan seated on a throne captures this unity of setting and character. The throne is massive, stone and cold, set against shadows. Conan sits not as king in splendor but as figure of myth, his body heavy, his eyes distant. The setting elevates the image into legend, transforming a simple seat into symbol of destiny fulfilled. It reminds us that settings in this film are not passive. They define meaning. The cinematic elements of Conan the Barbarian endure because they trust imagery, sound, and silence to tell the story. Spain's landscapes, the Wheel of Pain, the temples of serpents, the ruins and deserts, each setting is both literal and symbolic. The cinematography honors these places with patience. The lighting transforms them into myth. The sound makes them tactile. Together, they create a world that feels as ancient as the story itself, a world where myth can unfold not in words, but in atmosphere. Behind the scenes of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John is a story nearly as raw and mythic as what we see on screen. If the film feels heavy, scarred, and elemental, it is because the people who made it endured a process that mirrored the hardships of their characters. What we see in theaters is only half the story. The rest lingers in memories of cast and crew, in the accidents and obsessions that gave the movie its texture. John Milius, the director, was the force that set the tone. He approached the film less as fantasy and more as scripture. He demanded authenticity in every detail, from the weight of swords to the silence of landscapes. He rejected glossy studio shortcuts, pushing instead for real sweat, real danger, real exhaustion. His intensity bled into every department. Crew members later joked that working with Milius felt like marching into battle. He would roar orders, fire real guns into the air to get attention, and pace the set like a general commanding troops. His eccentricity was alarming at times, but it created a set charged with primal energy, a place where everyone felt they were not just making a movie but forging myth. Arnold Schwarzenegger carried much of that myth physically. Still early in his acting career, Arnold bore the pressure of embodying Conan, and he embraced it with almost fanatical discipline. He trained daily with heavy swords, learning to swing them until the weight looked effortless. He performed most of his own stunts, even when they left him bruised and bloodied. One story tells of him running from wild dogs on set, a scene meant to be staged but made dangerous when the dogs broke free of handlers. Arnold barely escaped, and his fear on camera is real. In another instance, a snake coiled around him during filming, squeezing so tightly the handlers had intervened. What audiences saw as struggle was genuine survival. The Wheel of Pain was not only symbolic, but exhausting. Built to function, it demanded real effort, and Arnold pushed it for hours under the sun. Locals who watched filming remembered him circling endlessly, his body gleaming with sweat, the image of myth carved in reality. For Arnold, the wheel was more than prop. It became training, both physical and psychological, for the endurance the role demanded. The supporting cast endured their own challenges. Sandahl Bergman, who played Valeria, performed her own stunts because no one else could match her look and movement. She fought with heavy weapons, hurled herself into chaos, and suffered injuries along the way. Gerry Lopez, as Subotai, had to adapt to exhausting stunt work, learning to balance athleticism with the demands of acting. James Earl Jones, as Thulsa Doom, brought calm intensity, but even he endured long hours in elaborate costumes under searing heat. Their sacrifices gave the film its authenticity. No one walked away unscathed. Spain itself shaped the production. The landscapes were beautiful but unforgiving. Deserts baked the crew by day. Nights dropped into cold. Equipment broke under dust. Storms halted shooting. Logistics strained every department. Yet these hardships became part of the film's DNA. When we see actors squint against wind, stumble through dirt, or shiver by firelight, we are watching genuine discomfort captured on film. The land itself directed as much as Milius did. The cult scenes were among the strangest behind-the-scenes experiences. Hundreds of extras, drawn from local villages, gathered around fires, cloaked and chanting. Crew described the atmosphere as unsettling, as though they had conjured a real ritual. Some extras later admitted they felt caught in something larger than cinema, swept into the energy of drums, fire, and mass voices. What was meant as performance sometimes felt like ceremony, and the line between acting and belief blurred uneasily. The music, too, was born in unusual circumstances. Basil Polidori's composed under tight deadlines, but he created something that transcended the film. He recorded with massive orchestras and choirs, layering sound that gave weight to imagery. Musicians recalled sessions where the intensity felt closer to war march than film score, the drums shaking walls, voices echoing like chants from ancient temples. For the crew, hearing the score for the first time was transformative, convincing them that what they were making was not pulp but legend. Accidents were frequent. Horses stumbled in battle scenes, injuring riders. Extras were burned by stray sparks during fire rituals. Actors clashed with real blades too heavy to fully control. Arnold himself bore scars from filming, and Bergman carried bruises that lasted long after production. Yet despite injuries, there was little room for pause. The schedule demanded endurance, and the cast pressed on. Their pain became part of the film's authenticity. Controversy surrounded the production as well. Animal rights groups criticized the use of live snakes and horses. Censors worried about the film's brutality and pagan imagery. Some in Hollywood doubted the project entirely, calling it too strange, too violent, too niche to succeed. Yet these doubts only fueled the determination of Milius and the Laurentiis, who pushed forward with stubborn conviction. The very controversies that threatened the film later became part of its myth, feeding its reputation as dangerous, forbidden cinema. There were moments of levity, too. Crew members joked about the rubber cow used in one sequence, dressing it with hats between takes. Extras laughed between rituals, children from local villages sneaking onto set to watch sword fights. Arnold himself, despite his intensity, often broke tension with humor, clowning around between grueling stunts, lifting crew members in mock displays of strength. These lighter moments gave balance to a production that might otherwise have collapsed under its own weight. When the film wrapped, cast and crew carried away more than memories. They carried scars, exhaustion, and pride. Many spoke later of how hard it had been, how dangerous, how strange, but also of how unforgettable. For Arnold, it was the role that made him a star. For Milius, it was the realization of a vision bordering on obsession. For extras and locals, it was a story they would tell for decades, of the time a Hollywood myth came to their fields and mountains. The behind-the-scenes truth of Conan the Barbarian is that it was forged as roughly as Conan himself. It was brutal, scarred, filled with danger and strangeness. And like Conan, it survived. Its endurance is visible not only in the film we watch, but in the stories told by those who made it. Stories of snakes and wheels, of fire and blood, of laughter and scars. The film endures because it was lived before it was filmed. Its myth written not only on screen, but on the bodies and memories of its creators. The themes and symbolism of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John, form the soul of the film. Beneath the swords, blood, and spectacle runs a meditation on strength, survival, faith, vengeance, love, and destiny. This is why the movie endures. It is not only pulp fantasy, but mythic allegory, a story where every image resonates with meaning. To explore it is to walk through a forest of symbols, each tree whispering a truth about human existence. The most central theme is the philosophy of steel. Early in the film, Conan's father speaks of the riddle of steel, teaching his son that flesh and gods may fail, but steel endures. This lesson is at once practical and metaphysical, shaping Conan's worldview. Steel symbolizes survival through strength, the cold certainty that in a world of chaos, the blade is what allows endurance. Yet the film complicates this. Thulsa Doom, in his chilling charisma, argues that flesh is stronger, that faith are more powerful than any weapon. His cult obeys his voice, not his sword. This clash of philosophies, steel versus flesh, strength versus belief, forms a symbolic backbone of a narrative. When Conan finally severs Doom's head, it is not only vengeance but the triumph of steel over ideology, or perhaps the recognition that both are illusions, that survival depends on the balance between the two. The theme of vengeance is equally central. Conan's life is shaped by loss, his parents killed, his village destroyed, his childhood stolen. His quest is not for justice, but for personal retribution. Symbolically, vengeance in the film is both poison and purpose. It drives him forward, fuels his survival, but it also isolates him, narrows his vision until love is lost and silence remains. When he achieves vengeance, it is hollow, leaving him scarred rather than satisfied. The film reminds us that vengeance can sustain but cannot heal, that its symbolic weight is fire, warming, destructive, consuming. Love emerges as counterpoint. Valeria is not simply lover but flame, a symbol of life beyond vengeance. She represents equality, companionship, joy. Her presence softens Conan, reminding him that survival is not only about killing but about living. Her death, however, transforms her into myth. She becomes symbol of sacrifice, her spirit haunting him, reminding him always of what vengeance costs. In her, the film suggests that love is a true counterweight to steel, that without its strength is hollow. Loyalty threads through the story, embodied in Subotai, whose companionship is not demanded but chosen. His loyalty symbolizes the bonds we forge not through blood, but through recognition and trust. In a world where everything is fragile, where gods are silent and kings corrupt, loyalty becomes sacred. It is a thread that keeps Conan human, reminding him that even legends need companions. Faith, embodied by Doom's cult, is one of the most potent themes. His followers surrender themselves completely, leaping to their deaths at his command, worshipping serpents, abandoning family and self. Faith here symbolizes both the human hunger for meaning and the danger of surrendering individuality. Doom represents the seduction of ideology, the way belief can enslave more thoroughly than chains. Yet the film also portrays faith as power. His cult thrives because belief unites them. The symbolism is dual. Faith can destroy and sustain, enslave and empower. It is not dismissed but shown as a force as real as steel. The theme of survival runs beneath everything. Conan endures the wheel, the pit's betrayal, crucifixion. His survival is not luck, but will. Symbolically, survival represents humanity's oldest truth. We endure storms, wars, famines, not because we are noble, but because we refuse to fall. Conan embodies this elemental truth. He is not philosopher, not saint, not king in these moments. He is survival incarnate. Destiny shadows Conan's journey. From the moment of his parents' death, his life feels scripted by gods or fate. He stumbles into companions, into kings, into Doom himself, as though led by unseen hand. The narration, the imagery, the silences all emphasize that Conan is not merely living but fulfilling destiny. Yet the film complicates this by showing his choices. He survives because he fights, loves because he dares, kills because he refuses submission. Destiny here symbolizes the paradox of life. We feel shaped by forces larger than ourselves, yet it is our actions that right the path. Symbolism abounds in imagery. The wheel of pain is not only a machine, but symbol of endurance, of time, of how suffering carves identity. The tree of woe, where Conan is crucified, symbolizes both death and resurrection, an echo of mythic crucifixion imagery. His survival, making him Christ-like figure of endurance. The temples of Doom, with their serpent motifs, symbolize the danger of surrendering to primal fears, the seduction of chaos disguised as faith. Fire, constantly present, symbolizes both destruction and purification, consuming temples, lighting rituals, guiding vengeance. Even silence is symbolic. The long passages without dialogue remind us that myth is not told in chatter, but in images and atmosphere. Silence symbolizes the weight of destiny, the unspeakable truths of grief and survival. It forces us to watch, to feel, to absorb meaning without words. In the end, the film's greatest theme is transformation. Conan begins as child, becomes slave, gladiator, thief, lover, avenger, and finally king. His journey symbolizes humanity's own transformations, the way suffering shapes us, the way loss carves us, the way survival elevates us. He is not merely character, but symbol of endurance itself. Conan the Barbarian is thus a story about more than swords and vengeance. It is about the riddle of steel, the seduction of faith, the fire of love, the curse of vengeance, the sanctity of loyalty, the inevitability of destiny, the triumph of survival. Every image, every silence, every wound is symbolic. That is why it endures, not as pulp, not as camp, but as myth disguised as cinema. The filmmaking techniques and box office story of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, John, are as much a part of the legend as the film itself. What we see on screen, the weight of silence, the brutality of steel, the sweep of landscapes, was crafted by choices that were bold, risky, and sometimes reckless. Behind those choices is also the story of how a film that critics doubted and censors questioned became a financial success and a cultural touchstone, shaping the careers of its star and influencing the fantasy genre for decades. John Milius approached the camera like a chronicler of myth rather than a maker of entertainment. His filmmaking techniques emphasized patience, scale, and silence. Instead of filling the film with chatter, he trusted imagery to speak. The camera lingers on landscapes, on the wheel of pain, on Arnold's silent endurance. This reliance on visual storytelling recalls silent cinema, where meaning emerged from gesture, shadow, and soundscape rather than words. By stripping away dialogue, Milius gave the film a weight that many viewers misread as stiffness, but which in truth was a deliberate invocation of myth. Cinematography reinforced this mythic quality. Panoramic shots situate Conan against landscapes so vast he seems like a fragment of dust. Yet close-ups reveal the scars, the sweat, the intensity of survival, the use of natural light. Sun blazing on plains, fire crackling in temples, kept the film grounded in elemental forces. The camera moved sparingly, often holding steady during battles, allowing weight and rhythm to replace frenetic energy. This gave fights the feel of ritual rather than spectacle, each swing of the sword like a verse in a poem. Sound design was equally meticulous. The roar of wind, the hiss of fire, the clang of steel, all were emphasized to create tactile immersion. But the most powerful element was Basil Polidori's score, recorded with full orchestra and choirs. It was composed not as background but as central narrative. The score drives the story, elevating silence into grandeur, violence into opera. Fun facts from recording sessions reveal how intense the process was. Percussion so loud it rattled walls, choirs chanting invented languages, instruments layered until the sound felt ancient. Without this score, Conan would have been pulp. With it, it became legend. Practical effects anchored the spectacle. The wheel of pain was built to function. Snakes were real. Swords were heavy. Sets were massive. Milius insisted on realism, even when dangerous. This choice gave the film a tactile authenticity absent from glossy productions. When Arnold wrestles a snake, when extras march as cultists, when buildings burn, what we see carries weight because much it was real. Filmmaking became endurance, survival, not illusion. Editing reinforced the film's unusual rhythm. Scenes breathe, silence lingers. The film resists fast pacing, instead moving with the rhythm of myth. Slow build, sudden violence, quiet aftermath. This choice frustrated some audiences expecting quick thrills, but it cemented the film's identity as epic rather than mere adventure. The editing treated the story as legend, not spectacle, trusting that its weight would endure. Box office production tells another tale. Studios doubted the project, nervous about its violence and its star. Arnold was not yet proven. Milius was eccentric. Censors trimmed sequences. Critics mocked early previews. Yet audiences came. The marketing emphasized brutality, myth, and spectacle, leaning into controversy rather than avoiding it. Posters of Arnold wielding a massive sword, music swelling in trailers, whispers of forbidden violence. All drew crowds. What critics dismissed as pulp, audiences embraced as experience. The film grows far beyond expectations, becoming a sleeper success. It turned Arnold Schwarzenegger from bodybuilder curiosity into star, opened the path to the Terminator and global fame. For Dino de Laurentiis, the producer, it was proof that pulp could sell when dressed in mythic grandeur. For studios, it launched a wave of sword and sorcery films in the 1980s, most inferior but all indebted to Conan. The box office success was not limited to numbers. It reshaped cultural perception. Audiences quoted lines, imitated Conan's endurance, hummed Polidori's score. Merchandise appeared. Sequels were greenlit, and the image of Arnold as Barbarian entered pop culture permanently. Critics may have been divided, but the audience vote was clear. This film mattered. Filmmaking techniques and box office success intersect in one truth. The film endured because it was honest. Milius's techniques trusted silence, weight, danger. Polidori's music turned pulp into opera. Arnold's physicality gave myth flesh. Spain's landscapes gave it authenticity. And audiences responded, not to polish, but to rawness. The box office confirmed what the techniques had already promised. That myth, even when brutal and strange, still has power in modern cinema. Thus, the filmmaking and the financial story mirror Conan himself. Both were doubted, mocked, scarred, but both endured. Like Conan, the film was shaped by struggle and emerged stronger. Its techniques gave it myth. Its box office gave it survival. And together they made it legend. The cast, the interviews, and the audience reviews of Conan the Barbarian in 1982, John, form the human voice that surrounds a myth. They are the stories told by those who embody the characters, by those who shaped them in production, and by those who sat in theaters and walked out changed. These voices are as important as the swords and music, because they reveal how the film was lived, interpreted, and remembered. At the center of this storm is Arnold Schwarzenegger. In 1982, he was not yet the icon of global cinema, but a bodybuilder with ambition. To many, casting him as Conan seemed reckless. His accent, his acting inexperience, his unconventional look, all were seen as risks. But in interviews, Arnold embraced the skepticism. He spoke of how he saw Conan as destiny, a role written for his body and his life. He trained relentlessly, swinging heavy swords until they became extensions of himself, pushing the wheel of pain until it no longer felt like performance but ritual. In later years, Arnold reflected on the role with gratitude, acknowledging that Conan made him a star, gave him credibility, and opened the path to the Terminator. His interviews reveal both humor and pride, as he recalled snake wrestling, real bruises, and the strangeness of delivering lines with his accent only to hear fans quote them for decades afterward. Sandahl Bergman, who played Valeria, was equally vital to the film's heart. In interviews, she spoke of the physical demands of the role, how she performed her own stunts, because no double could match her. She recalled bruises, exhaustion, and fear, but also pride in portraying a female warrior who was not passive but equal. For Bergman, Valeria was more than love interest. She was flame, independence, and sacrifice. Audiences later praised her as one of the strongest female characters in fantasy cinema of the time, a symbol of agency in a genre that often sidelined women. Her interviews often carried warmth, laughter at the absurdities of production, but also recognition of Valeria's cultural importance. Gerry Lopez as Sydow brought loyalty and humor, a real-life surfer and friend of Milius. He was not a trained actor, but was chosen for his energy and presence. Interviews with Lopez reveal his astonishment at being part of a massive production, his amusement at learning to handle weapons, his awe at the landscapes of Spain. For audiences, Sydow became beloved, his quick wit and loyalty balancing Conan's silence. Critics often noted that he gave the film humanity, and interviews suggest he enjoyed being that heart. James Earl Jones as Thulsa Doom gave the film its gravitas. His deep voice, his calm delivery, his piercing gaze, all transformed a pulp villain into a figure chilling philosophy. In interviews, Jones spoke of how he approached Doom not as a monster, but as a prophet, a man who believed his own ideology. He recognized the danger of charisma, the seduction of power, and he channeled that understanding into his performance. Audiences and critics alike praised him as the most magnetic presence in the film, a villain unforgettable because he was believable. Max von Sydow, as King Osric, lent the film his legendary gravitas, even in a smaller role. In interviews, he admitted that fantasy was not his usual genre, but he took the role for its theatricality, and because he admired Milius's vision. His performance gave the film a touch of regal sorrow, reminding audiences that kingdoms crumble as easily as villages. His presence elevated the film's credibility, anchoring it in cinematic tradition. Audience reviews at the time were mixed but passionate. Some walked out disturbed by its brutality, complaining of violence, nudity, and pagan imagery. Others thrilled at its rawness, declaring it unlike anything they had seen. Young audiences whispered about its forbidden excesses, trading stories of the wheel, the snakes, the sacrifices. Over time, nostalgia reshaped these reviews. Fans returned to the film with reverence, calling it mythic, operatic, singular. Today, reviews often highlight its silences, its music, its weight, praising it as art disguised as pulp. Scholars and critics who interviewed cast and crew later emphasized how hard the production was. They wrote of bruises, exhaustion, danger, but also of pride. The cast often laughed in interviews about absurd moments, Arnold running from real dogs, extras chanting until they lost their voices, Bergman wielding swords nearly as heavy as her body. These recollections humanize the myth, showing how cinema is made not only by ideas but by endurance. Audience voices today treat the film as cult classic and cornerstone. Online reviews speak of childhood memories, of discovering it en vis, of quoting its lines endlessly. Many highlight Basil Polidori's score as unforgettable, James Earl Jones's eyes as hypnotic, Arnold's silence as iconic. Some younger viewers find it strange, slow, archaic, but even they recognize its uniqueness in a world of glossy blockbusters. Its reviews now carry the weight of myth themselves, each fan adding to the legend with their own memory. The cast, interviews, and audience responses all converge on one truth. Conan the Barbarian is not just a film but a lived experience. For the cast, it was scars, sweat, laughter, and danger. For the audience, it was shock, awe, nostalgia, and reverence. For critics, it was division, controversy, rediscovery. Together, these voices form the chorus around the myth, ensuring that the film endures not only as spectacle but as memory, conversation, and legacy. The storm of Conan the Barbarian, 1982, now closes John, and we arrive at the final silence. The conclusion. This is where the 13-step journey we have taken through the film gathers itself into a single reflection. Like Conan himself seated on his throne in the final image, scarred and distant, we too must sit with what we have witnessed. The weight of myth, the brutality of survival, the philosophy of steel, the voices of cast and audience, the production's dangers and triumphs, and the strange endurance of a film once doubted but now immortal. Looking back, we see how each part of this analysis has unfolded like verses of an epic poem. The introduction reminded us that this was not mere pulp, but an intellectual exploration, a myth dressed in cinema. The plot of the first half gave us the boy chained to the wheel of pain, the child whose life was carved by loss into silence. The plot of the second half gave us the man, scarred, avenger, lover, and finally legend. Characters stepped forward not only as people but as archetypes. Conan as survival, Valeria as flame, Subbatai as loyalty, Doom as charisma and corruption, Osric as decline, the princess as innocence. We walked through Strange as Facts production, through accidents, snakes, bruises, chanting extras. We studied critical perspectives, seeing how the film was dismissed, censored, rediscovered, revered. We heard the behind-the-scenes echoes, the scars carried by cast and crew, the obsessive vision of Milius. We entered its themes and symbols, steel versus flesh, vengeance versus love, faith versus loyalty, destiny versus choice. We explored its filmmaking techniques, its silences, its score, its patience, and we traced its box office story, how pulp became profit and profit became legacy. We listened to cast interviews and audience reviews, voices that carried the myth forward into memory. Now, we gather these strands together to understand why this film endures. The conclusion is simple yet heavy. Conan the Barbarian endures because it is myth carved into film. It is brutal, strange, scarred, but it is honest. It refuses to soften violence. It refuses to chatter endlessly. It refuses to treat myth as decoration. Instead, it gives us silence, endurance, pain, sacrifice. It is not a polished fantasy, but a raw epic. Closer to Homer than to Hollywood. Closer to Gilgamesh than to Marvel. That honesty is why critics were divided, why audiences were shocked, why censors trembled, why fans still hum Basil Polidori's score. Honesty unsettles, but it also endures. For Arnold, the film was destiny, the role that transformed him from bodybuilder curiosity into cinematic legend. For Sandahl Bergman, it was bruises and fire, but also one of the most powerful roles given to a woman in fantasy at the time. For James Earl Jones, It was a chance to embody charisma as terror, to show how belief enslaves more thoroughly than chains. For the audience, it was shock, awe, confusion, laughter, reverence. For all of us who revisit it, it is a reminder that myth never dies. It only takes new form. The symbolism of steel and flesh, of wheel and throne, of vengeance and silence, lingers long after the credits. Conan survives, but his survival is scarred. His vengeance is complete, but his grief is unhealed. The film ends not in triumph, but in ambiguity. The image of a man seated on a throne not of joy, but of destiny. That ambiguity is its genius. Life is not resolved. Myth is not comfort. Survival is not peace. And so the film tells us a truth older than cinema, that to live is to endure storms without resolution. Culturally, the film has become more than artifact. It shaped a genre, influenced decades of sword and sorcery films, inspired fans and scholars alike. It proved that pulp could be opera, that silence could be powerful, that music could elevate spectacle into legend. Its box office confirmed what audiences already felt, that they were hungry not only for spectacle, but for myth. And its legacy lives on not only in sequels and imitations, but in memory, in lines quoted, in images recalled, in the feeling of watching Arnold push the wheel endlessly under the sun. As we close this analysis, what remains is silence, the same silence that fills so much of the film. But it is not empty silence. It is a silence of reflection, the silence amid settling into memory, the silence after fire has consumed temples and the night sky is still. It is a silence that asks us to look at our own lives, our own wheels, our own destinies, and ask, what is our steel? What is our vengeance? What is our love? What throne waits for us at the end of our endurance? So, my dear literature-loving friends, thank you for walking with me through the storm of myth and memory. If you have felt the weight of steel, if you have remembered your own storms in these images, then let us not end here. Support Cinema Vault with a like, a subscribe, and the ringing of the bell, and share your reflections in the comments. Tell me the myths that shaped you, the wheels you have turned, the destinies you have endured. For cinema, like myth, is not only story but conversation, and together we keep these legends alive.